A 50-year-old woman trying to qualify on the M210 in a Category 2 gale? Ma'am, with all due respect, this range is for shooters, not for wishful thinkers. The crowd of young Marines, huddled in their wet weather gear, chuckled nervously. The words, flung like stones by Gunnery Sergeant Thorne, echoed across the windswept valley of the Marine Corps Sniper School. He was a man carved from granite and sarcasm, his voice a bullhorn of institutional certainty. He stood with his hands on his hips, a gatekeeper enjoying his power, performing for the gallery of recruits who saw him as the final word on marksmanship. The object of his scorn, Master Sergeant Eva Rostova, offered no reaction. She didn't flinch, her gaze didn't shift, her expression remained as neutral as the gray sky above. Her uniform was Air Force, a stark blue-gray in a sea of olive drab, marking her as an outsider. She looked less like a warrior and more like a librarian who had taken a wrong turn. But high in the observation tower, Colonel Jennings leaned forward, binoculars pressed to his eyes. He wasn't watching the target. He was watching her hands. He saw the way she methodically wiped a single drop of rain from her scope's objective lens, her movements economical, devoid of any wasted energy. He saw the quiet confidence in her posture, a stillness that seemed to defy the howling wind. He had seen that kind of calm before, in places where noise meant death. If you believe discipline is louder than doubt, type steady in the comments below. The humiliation continued, a verbal barrage designed to break her focus. Thorne gestured dismissively at her rifle. That's a fine-looking museum piece you've got there, Master Sergeant. But it was top of the line back when targets were made of wood. He paced in front of the firing line, his voice rising over the gale. Ladies and gentlemen, the Air Force has graced us with their presence. They think shooting is like flying a desk, all theory and no turbulence. But out here, the wind doesn't care about your rank or your service branch. Ballistics is a science, not a suggestion. He tapped a laminated chart taped to a nearby post. The book says a shot at 1,200 meters in these conditions has a probability of impact of less than 5%. 5. That's a prayer, not a calculated risk. We are closing this range for safety. It's a wash. Yet, Rostova remained a statue of placid concentration. She ignored his monologue, her world shrinking to the rifle in her hands, the subtle shifts in the wind, and the rhythm of her own breathing. Her silence was a void that Thorne's arrogance could not fill. It was an active, unnerving presence. The junior Marines, following their gunny's lead, saw a stubborn old woman. Colonel Jennings, however, saw something else entirely. He saw a professional at work, a master of a deadly craft so steeped in practice it had become instinct. He saw someone who didn't need to speak because her actions were about to deliver a lecture that would be remembered here for decades. The challenge was laid, not by order, but by the sheer weight of Thorne's condescension. "All right, ma'am," he finally boomed, throwing his hands up in mock surrender. "You're the last one on the roster. The colonel is watching. The entire class is watching. Go on then. Show us the miracle. Let's see you defy physics." He stepped back, a smug grin plastered on his face, certain he was about to witness a spectacular failure that would validate his every prejudice. Rostova, in response, simply settled into her final firing position. Her movements were a study in fluid dynamics, a dance of practiced efficiency. She didn't consult a digital wind meter or a sophisticated ballistics app. Instead, she gently pulled a single, long blade of grass from a clump near her mat. She held it between her thumb and forefinger and let it go, watching its frantic, twisting descent. She observed the way the sheets of rain slanted, how they seemed to bend and shear at different points across the valley. She watched the distant, skeletal branches of a lone pine tree sway and whip. She was not just looking at the wind, she was reading it, deciphering a language written in motion and water. Her breathing slowed, becoming a deep, metronomic cadence. Inhale, hold, exhale. Her finger found the trigger. She adjusted the elevation and windage knobs on her scope with a series of quiet, precise clicks that were barely audible above the storm. Each click was a calculation, a whisper of experience against the howling gale. The world held its breath. The Marines on the line, the gunny with his arms crossed, the colonel in the tower, all eyes were on her. She waited. The wind was a physical force, a malevolent entity trying to tear the shot from her grasp. It screamed and gusted, a chaotic symphony of pressure and velocity. Thorn began to smirk, believing her hesitation was a sign of surrender. But Rostova wasn't hesitating. She was listening. She was waiting for a seam in the storm, a fractional moment of reprieve. Then it came. For a sliver of a second, the gale's roar dipped, a momentary lull between two massive gusts. It was a window of opportunity so small, so fleeting, that no machine could have predicted it. Only a human, perfectly attuned to the environment, could feel it. In that impossible instant, her rifle cracked. The sound was not a thunderous boom, but a sharp, clean report, a single, definitive syllable that cut through the storm's noise before being swallowed by it. A tense, electric silence followed. Every eye swung to the digital monitor in the range tower, which showed a live feed of the distant target. For a second, nothing. Then, the voice of the spotter, positioned safely downrange, crackled over the radio, laced with sheer, unadulterated disbelief. Impact. I have a confirmed impact, he paused, as if to reread his own senses. Center mass. X-ring. I repeat. Splash, center X-ring, a collective, audible gasp swept through the assembled Marines. The rain seemed to fall into a vacuum of stunned silence. Thorn's face went white, the arrogant smirk melting into a mask of slack-jawed shock. He snatched his binoculars, his hands trembling slightly, and stared downrange as if he could will the hole in the target to vanish. No, he whispered to himself, the single word of surrender. No way. That's not possible. Colonel Jennings descended the metal steps of the observation tower, his boots clanging with deliberate authority. The wind whipped at his uniform, but his expression was a mask of grim purpose. He strode directly past the line of shell-shocked Marines and stopped inches from Gunnery Sergeant Thorn, who looked as if he'd seen a ghost. Jennings' voice was low, but it cut through the wind like a razor. Gunny, he began, his tone devoid of any warmth. Do you know what Project Whispering Death was? Thorn, caught completely off guard, could only stammer. No, sir. I've never heard of it. The colonel didn't take his eyes off him, letting the question hang in the air for a moment longer before turning his gaze to Rostova, who was already calmly packing her gear as if she had done nothing more than staple a piece of paper. I thought that was you, Master Sergeant, Jennings said, his voice now imbued with a deep, resonating respect. Sanjin Valley, Afghanistan. 2011. The shot over the eastern ridge in the sandstorm. The one they said was impossible. He turned back to Thorn and the now silent crowd of young shooters, his voice rising to become a formal declaration. This is Master Sergeant Eva Rostova. She is not a liaison officer on a goodwill tour. She was, until her recent retirement from the program, the lead instructor and chief architect of the Air Force's Tier 1 designated marksman course. The revelation landed like a physical blow. The Marines stared at the quiet, unassuming woman with newfound awe, their earlier snickers now a source of burning shame. Colonel Jennings continued, his words a staccato burst of facts that dismantled every one of Thorn's arrogant assumptions. She wrote the book on high-angle, adverse weather shooting. The very same field manual, Gunnery Sergeant, that you have sitting on your desk. The one titled Atmospheric Dominance, a practical guide to environmental ballistics. She wrote it. She holds the classified, confirmed combat record for a successful engagement under these exact atmospheric conditions, a shot that saved the lives of a Marine recon team pinned down by enemy fire. Her unit was a Black Ops element so classified that most of its mission records are still sealed. You don't know her name because you weren't supposed to, he paused, letting the weight of her hidden legacy settle over them. He then turned to face Rostova directly. In a gesture that stunned every Marine present, the full-bird colonel, a man who commanded thousands, snapped to attention and rendered a perfect, crisp salute to the enlisted Master Sergeant. It is an honor to see you shoot again, Master Sergeant Rostova. The gesture was more powerful than any medal, a profound acknowledgement of earned respect between true professionals. He then turned back to the humbled assembly. Assumptions are a cancer in our profession. Today, you witnessed a living legend provide a lesson you will carry for the rest of your careers. Competence does not need to announce itself. It simply is. Remember her silence. Remember that shot. Dismissed. The story of the shot spread through the base like wildfire, transforming from range gossip into instant legend. By nightfall, Every Marine in the barracks, every instructor in the mess hall was talking about it. They called it the impossible Gale shot, or simply the Rostova. The quiet, 50-year-old Air Force Master Sergeant became a mythic figure overnight. The junior Marines who had laughed at her were now her most ardent disciples, recounting the event with a reverence usually reserved for Medal of Honor citations. They spoke in hushed tones about the way she read the wind, the impossible calm she possessed, the single, perfect crack of her rifle that had silenced a storm and a gunnery sergeant in one go. They dissected every detail, turning a moment of marksmanship into a parable about humility and expertise. The narrative shifted from one of mockery to one of profound respect, a cautionary tale for any young shooter who thought they knew everything. The culture of the sniper school itself began to shift, a subtle but significant change in the air. The focus moved from loud proclamations of skill to the quiet, diligent pursuit of it. The lesson was clear. The most dangerous person on the range isn't the one who talks the most, but the one who listens the hardest. The most profound transformation, however, was in Gunnery Sergeant Thorne. The event had shattered his brittle confidence, but it had not broken him. Instead, it had humbled him, forcing a deep and uncomfortable period of self-reflection. The next morning, he found Rostova by the armory, where she was meticulously cleaning her rifle. He approached not with the swagger of a superior, but with the quiet deference of a student. There was no formal, awkward apology. He knew words were insufficient. Instead, he asked a simple, genuine question, his voice stripped of all its former arrogance. "How, Master Sergeant? How did you read that wind sheer over the valley?" The charts said it was impossible. It was an admission of her mastery and a sincere request for knowledge. Rostova, without looking up from her work, answered him with the same quiet, technical precision she applied to everything. "The rain doesn't lie, Gunny," she said softly. "You watch how it bends over the terrain. The gusts leave patterns in the grass. The wind tells a story in 100 different ways. You just have to learn its language." She paused, finally meeting his gaze. "You were too busy talking to listen to it." She wasn't chastising him. She was teaching him. In that moment, she was not his victor, but his instructor. Later that week, someone recovered the single brass casing from her shot. It was polished and mounted on a small, dark wooden plaque, which was hung in the main classroom right next to the official windage charts. The inscription was simple, etched onto a small brass plate. Rostova, 1200 m, gale force. Remember the language of the wind. A year later, a new class of sniper candidates stood on that same firing line. The weather was turning foul, a hard, biting wind sweeping down from the mountains, bringing with it a cold, persistent rain. A young, confident Marine, fresh from infantry school, complained loudly to his spotter. "This is insane. You can't make a clean shot in this garbage." The instructor, a grizzled staff sergeant who had been present for Rostova's qualification, simply walked over and tapped the young Marine on the shoulder. He didn't speak. He just pointed to the plaque on the classroom wall, visible through the window. The story of the quiet Air Force Master Sergeant had become institutional folklore, a foundational myth of the school. It was told to every new student on the first day, a mandatory lesson in humility before they ever touched a rifle. The tale of how a woman, underestimated for her age, her gender, and her branch of service, had silenced a storm with a single, perfect shot was now a core part of their identity. It served as a constant reminder that true expertise is measured not in decibels, but in millimeters, not in boasts, but in results. The instructor who now told the story with the most passion and reverence was Gunnery Sergeant Thorne, a man remade by his own humbling. He used his own arrogance as the cautionary element of the tale, ensuring the next generation of shooters would learn from his mistake. The legacy of Master Sergeant Eva Rostova was not the hole she put in a distant target, but the hole she blew through a culture of corrosive arrogance. Her true impact wasn't measured on a scoring sheet, but in the changed attitudes of the men and women who came after her. Her silence had taught an entire generation of elite shooters that the most critical lessons are the ones you must listen for, not the ones that are shouted at you. She proved that competence is a quiet force, a deep well of disciplined practice that needs no external validation. It is a truth that exists independent of opinion or prejudice. True strength, they learned, was not found in the thunder of the rifle itself, but in the profound calm of the heart that fires it. Her one shot had recalibrated the moral compass of an entire institution, reminding them that respect is earned through demonstration, not demanded by rank, and that the quietest professional in the room is often the most dangerous. Her story became a testament to the enduring power of action over words, a legacy of quiet excellence that would echo in that valley long after the sound of her shot had faded. For more stories where precision triumphs over prejudice and where quiet competence defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.